Breaking: federal agents fatally shoot U.S. citizen in Minneapolis. Third death this month sparks street protests and federal-state confrontation. Federal agents fatally shot a 37-year-old U.S. citizen in Minneapolis Saturday morning, marking the third shooting by federal officers in the city this month. The incident has prompted immediate street protests, deployment of chemical irritants on crowds, and sharply conflicting accounts between federal and local authorities, raising fundamental questions about federal law enforcement operations in cities where local officials oppose such activities. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara confirmed the shooting occurred at approximately 9:03 a.m. when officers received reports of a shooting involving federal officials. The victim was identified as a white male, a Minneapolis resident, and a lawful gun owner with a valid permit to carry. He was transported to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. O'Hara stated he believes more than one law enforcement officer discharged their weapons during the incident, though he emphasized that federal authorities have not provided any official details about the incident to the Minneapolis Police Department or city authorities. The Department of Homeland Security released a statement on social media providing their account of the events. According to DHS, at 9:05 a.m. Central Time, law enforcement officers were conducting a targeted operation against an illegal alien wanted for violent assault when an individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The statement claims officers attempted to disarm the suspect, who violently resisted. An agent then fired defensive shots, fearing for his life and the safety of fellow officers. DHS stated the suspect had 2 magazines and no identification, characterizing the situation as one where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. The agency added that medics on scene immediately delivered medical aid to the subject, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey presented a starkly different account during a press conference Saturday morning. Frey stated he viewed video footage showing more than 6 masked agents pummeling one of our constituents and shooting him to death. He called for an immediate end to ICE operations in the city and questioned how many more Americans need to die or get badly hurt for this operation to end. Frey also pushed back against suggestions that local officials bear responsibility for tensions in the city, noting that just yesterday, 15,000 people peacefully protested in the streets, speaking out and standing up for their neighbors, resulting in not a single broken window and not a single injury. The gap between these two narratives presents a significant challenge for understanding what actually occurred. The federal account describes a lone armed individual approaching officers during a targeted operation, creating a deadly threat that required defensive action. The local account, based on video evidence city officials claim to have reviewed, describes multiple masked federal agents physically assaulting and then shooting a Minneapolis resident. These are fundamentally incompatible descriptions of the same event. Chief O'Hara's statement that federal authorities have not briefed local law enforcement adds another layer of complexity. In most jurisdictions, federal and local law enforcement maintain cooperative relationships with regular communication, especially after critical incidents involving use of force. The absence of any official communication from federal agencies to Minneapolis police about a fatal shooting in their city represents an unusual breakdown in standard protocols. Governor Tim Walz issued a statement calling on the White House to allow the state to lead the investigation into the shooting. In a social media post, Walz wrote that state investigators must secure justice and urged people to stay peaceful and give investigators space to process the scene. He added that the state has the personnel to keep people safe and that federal agents must not obstruct Minnesota's ability to do so. This represents a direct challenge to federal authority and raises questions about jurisdiction when federal agents use lethal force against U.S. citizens during immigration enforcement operations. Within hours of the shooting, protesters gathered at the scene, and the situation rapidly escalated. Chief O'Hara declared the gathering an unlawful assembly, and chemical irritants were deployed on crowds. Fox 9 reporter Kelly O'Connell reported having to run from chemical irritants as they were used on the crowd. Protesters blocked streets with dumpsters, and at least one dumpster fire was reported at the scene. Multiple protesters were taken to the ground by law enforcement. The Minneapolis Police Department requested mutual aid from the Minnesota State Patrol and regional law enforcement partners to manage the growing crowd. The use of chemical irritants on protesters following a controversial police shooting follows a pattern seen in other cities during periods of civil unrest. However, the deployment of such crowd control measures within hours of an incident where video evidence may contradict official accounts has intensified criticism from local officials and civil rights organizations. This incident is the third fatal shooting involving federal agents in Minneapolis since January 7, when Renee Good was killed by federal officers. That case became a flashpoint for protests and sparked days of mass demonstrations against the Trump administration's immigration enforcement operations in the Twin Cities. The repetition of fatal encounters between federal agents and Minneapolis residents within such a short time frame has created a volatile atmosphere in the city. The political response has been immediate and divided. Representative Ilhan Omar issued a statement describing the incident as an execution by immigration enforcement. She stated she was absolutely heartbroken, horrified, and appalled that federal agents murdered another member of our community. Omar characterized the situation as part of a pattern, stating this isn't isolated or accidental and that the Trump administration is trying to beat us into submission rather than protect us. She demanded that ICE and CBP leave Minnesota immediately, arguing their presence is terrorizing our communities, violating rights, and taking lives with zero accountability. Senator Amy Klobuchar tweeted a direct message to the Trump administration, writing, "Donald Trump and all your lieutenants who ordered this ICE surge, watch the horrific video of the killing today. The world is watching." She cited thousands of citizens stopped and harassed, local police no longer able to do their work, kids hiding, and schools closed. Klobuchar called on the administration to get ICE out of Minnesota and urged Republicans in Congress to stop their silence and stop being complicit. Representative Zach Stevenson, House DFL leader, released a statement questioning how many people must die before Donald Trump's drive for retribution is satisfied. He argued that the federal government lacks credibility to investigate the matter and called for the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension to lead the investigation, with anyone who broke Minnesota law held accountable. Stevenson emphasized no absolute immunity, no lies, and demanded justice and peace. Republican state leaders offered a different perspective on the situation. House Speaker Lisa DeMuth expressed heartbreak over the loss of life but stated that political leaders urging direct confrontation, including attempted disruption of law enforcement operations and throwing of dangerous objects, put lives of officers and the public at risk. She called for leadership at all levels of government to turn down the temperature and noted she had spoken with Vice President Vance earlier in the week, who expressed both publicly and privately a sincere desire to foster better cooperation between the federal government and state and local officials. House Republican floor leader Harry Niska added that escalation, violent rhetoric, and demonization has put the lives of Minnesotans and law enforcement alike in danger. He stated it was time to work together to remove violent criminals from communities and ensure the safety of all Minnesotans, arguing that knee-jerk reactions demanding confrontation instead of cooperation are putting everyone at risk. The Border Patrol Union released a statement defending the agents involved in the shooting. The union stated that Border Patrol agents are trained extremely well to protect themselves, their fellow agents, and innocent third parties. When a supposed peaceful protester brings a weapon such as a loaded handgun and brandishes it, there are going to be severe consequences and repercussions, according to the statement. The union blamed media and politicians for irresponsible, hate-filled and false rhetoric that portrays agents as aggressors and encourages reckless confrontations with officers performing their lawful duties. The statement concluded by expressing full confidence that when more facts are revealed, agents will be shown to have utilized justifiable force in eliminating the threat. The ACLU of Minnesota issued a response calling the shooting further proof that federal agents are out of control and critically endangering communities. Executive Director Deepinder Mail noted that yesterday tens of thousands of Minnesotans from all walks of life marched through the streets in sub-zero temperatures to demand ICE stop terrorizing communities. And today we wake up to the heartbreaking news that federal officials killed another person. The organization demanded that ICE and CBP end operations in Minneapolis before anyone else is harmed and called for an independent investigation. Noreen Shah, Director of Immigration Policy and Government Affairs of the National ACLU, stated that after the horrific shooting of Renee Good, the Trump administration recklessly escalated and deployed even more heavily armed agents into Minneapolis. And today we are again seeing the devastating and predictable consequences. She called on Congress to rein ICE in before what happened in Minneapolis happens yet again, urging senators to reject a DHS budget that allows these lawless agencies to continue putting communities in danger. The incident raises several critical questions about the conduct of federal immigration enforcement operations in jurisdictions where local officials have declared opposition to such activities. The fact that the victim was a U.S. citizen during an operation allegedly targeting an illegal alien wanted for violent assault suggests either a case of mistaken identity, an escalation beyond the intended target, or circumstances not yet fully explained by either federal or local authorities. The description of the victim as a lawful gun owner with a permit to carry adds another dimension to the analysis. In many jurisdictions, the presence of a legally owned firearm carried by a permit holder would not automatically constitute a threat justifying deadly force. The question of whether the individual brandished the weapon, as federal authorities claim, or whether he was simply in possession of a legally carried firearm when confronted by masked federal agents will likely be central to any investigation. The refusal of federal authorities to brief local law enforcement represents a significant departure from standard interagency cooperation protocols. In typical scenarios involving federal operations and local jurisdictions, there is at minimum a post-incident notification to local police, particularly when the incident results in a fatality. The complete absence of communication from federal agencies to Minneapolis police suggests either a deliberate decision to withhold information or a breakdown in the normal channels of law enforcement coordination. DHS stated that about 200 rioters arrived at the scene and began to obstruct and assault law enforcement, prompting the deployment of crowd control measures for public and law enforcement safety. The characterization of protesters as rioters and the claim that they assaulted law enforcement will likely be contested by protest organizers and civil rights groups, particularly given Mayor Frey's emphasis on the peaceful nature of the previous day's much larger demonstration. The broader context of this incident includes the Trump administration's expanded immigration enforcement operations in cities that have declared themselves sanctuaries or otherwise oppose cooperation with federal immigration authorities. Minneapolis has been a focal point of these operations, resulting in confrontations between federal agents and both local officials and community members. The deployment of what local officials describe as masked federal agents conducting operations without coordination with local police has created an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty. Residents report federal vehicles without clear markings and agents without visible identification conducting stops and arrests throughout the city. This operational approach differs significantly from traditional immigration enforcement, which typically involved coordination with local authorities and clear identification of federal agents. As of midday Saturday, the area around the shooting scene remained active with ongoing law enforcement presence and protesters. Minneapolis officials continued to request that people avoid the area while the situation develops. Chief O'Hara urged everyone to remain calm and avoid destroying the city, while acknowledging significant anger and questions about what happened. The incident has created a crisis of legitimacy regarding federal operations in Minneapolis, with local officials from the mayor to the governor to members of Congress demanding that federal agents leave the city, and with federal authorities defending their operations as lawful enforcement of congressional statutes. The fundamental question of how federal immigration law is enforced in jurisdictions with hostile local governments remains unresolved. The existence of video evidence that city officials claim contradicts the federal narrative suggests this incident will not be resolved quickly or easily. If the videos show what Mayor Frey describes, pressure for federal accountability will intensify. If the videos corroborate the federal account of an armed individual approaching and threatening agents, the incident may be viewed differently. The refusal to release these videos or provide them to federal investigators conducting their own review will likely become a point of contention. The shooting has occurred against a backdrop of national debate over immigration enforcement, federal authority, and state sovereignty. The Trump administration has characterized its operations as enforcement of federal law that states and localities have no authority to obstruct. Local officials have characterized federal operations as violations of constitutional rights and threats to public safety. This incident, resulting in the death of a U.S. citizen, has brought these competing narratives into direct and deadly conflict.